Canada encompasses 9.98 million square kilometers. By sheer landmass, it's the second largest country on Earth, able to comfortably swallow the European Union. Despite that colossal scale, the map hollows out. When ancient glaciers retreated, they acted like heavy machinery, scraping the landscape clean and leaving behind exposed granite with almost no topsoil. Without thick topsoil, planting crops at any meaningful scale is impossible. That single geological fact removes millions of square kilometers from supporting mass human settlement. It also turns basic engineering into a logistical nightmare. Laying pipes, building foundations, and paving roads require cutting through millions of tons of solid rock. When workers attempted to lay track for the Pacific Railway in 1862, they hit granite deposits so dense that standard dynamite charges failed to break the stone. Look at a map of North America, and Canada demands your attention. It covers a staggering 9.98 million square kilometers, commanding the longest coastline on Earth and hoarding 20% of the planet's fresh water inside millions of inland lakes. But look at this population density map of North America, and a severe anomaly appears. The vast majority of the country's 40 million citizens are compressed into a tiny sliver of land, a thin spillover from the United States border, fading into a massive black void. The numbers behind this distribution are jarring. Roughly 80% of all Canadians live within just 100 miles of the southern border, occupying a strip of land that accounts for less than 5% of the nation's total area. Canada's geography flips the standard national model. This is a gargantuan wilderness with a tiny, overcrowded rim. Most observers attribute this empty interior to the weather. With Arctic winds dragging winter temperatures below -20 degrees Celsius, it's easy to assume the land is simply too cold to support human settlement. However, latitude provides a poor explanation for the emptiness. Deep inside Lake Erie, Canada's middle island sits entirely uninhabited, even though it lies further south than parts of Northern California and shares a latitude with Rome. Global comparisons further weaken the climate argument. Russia sustains massive industrial population centers at the exact same freezing northern latitudes, where Canada remains utterly desolate. Freezing weather fails to explain the empty map. The true barrier preventing human expansion lies hidden in the ground. The primary geographic antagonist is the Canadian Shield. This is a 5 million square kilometer plateau of exposed bedrock that dominates the top half of the continent. This fortress was weaponized during the last ice age. As the Laurentide ice sheet expanded, it acted as a planetary bulldozer. Millions of tons of ice violently scraped the Earth, physically stripping away thick layers of topsoil and pushing the debris south. When the ice finally retreated, it left behind a devastated landscape. In place of deep, nutrient-rich earth, the ground consists of a highly acidic, razor-thin layer of soil sitting directly on top of 4-billion-year-old solid granite. Crops cannot grow in ancient stone. Consequently, only 5% of Canada's total landmass is actually arable, forcing the population into those rare pockets of fertile earth. The shield breaks the continent's carrying capacity. Without the ability to plant crops in solid granite, large-scale human settlement is starved out, regardless of how much the climate warms. In the 19th century, humanity tried to conquer this geography. During the construction of the Pacific Railway in 1862, westward expansion crashed headlong into the shield. Building tracks through this terrain required a violent engineering struggle. Standard dynamite proved useless against the Precambrian rock, forcing workers to use highly unstable nitroglycerin to blast through the granite. Beyond the hard rock, the landscape offered a secondary hazard: muskeg swamps. These unpredictable bogs routinely swallowed heavy infrastructure and locomotives, forcing engineers to replace the same stretch of track 7 times. These historical failures proved the shield was an active, hostile fortress. It permanently drew the boundaries of human ambition in North America. That brings us to the inhabited 5%. We have to look at why this specific stretch of land avoided the fate of the shield. The southern corridor relies on a thermodynamic engine. The Great Lakes act as colossal heat sinks, absorbing summer warmth and radiating it outward across the Windsor-Quebec corridor to insulate the arable land against the winter. While the lakes provided the warmth, the St. Lawrence River acted as a deep water funnel. It dictated exactly where European empires could penetrate the continent, anchoring major cities exclusively within this protected, navigable corridor. This southern corridor is a rare geographic jackpot, a fertile, navigable island trapped against a billion-year-old rock wall. Millions of Canadians thrive on the border of this fortress by building extreme infrastructure. Montreal's underground city spans 32 kilometers, allowing residents to live and work in a climate-controlled environment that bypasses the winter entirely. They also weaponized the shield's rugged topography. By damming the remote northern rivers, they turned the hostile terrain into a massive green battery of hydroelectric power that fuels cities as far away as New York. Canada is a highly dense, European-sized nation, permanently attached to a subcontinental wilderness. The Canadian map depicts a high-density society thriving on the very edge of the Earth's oldest geological trap. Canada covers 9.98 million square kilometers. It is the second largest country on Earth, with enough landmass to swallow the entire European Union and still have room left over. Yet inside that colossal footprint, there are fewer residents than in the state of California. This population map shows exactly how those residents are distributed. Nearly 90% of all Canadians live in a narrow, 100-mile strip of land clinging tightly to the United States border. Moving north, the data points vanish. This dark interior persists because of a direct two-front war against geography. Living in Canada requires being pinned against the southern border by two physical barriers, a billion-year-old wall of bedrock and an unrelenting deep freeze. The first barrier is geological. This topographical map highlights a horseshoe-shaped expanse covering half the country, the Canadian Shield, a layer of exposed Precambrian rock roughly 4 billion years old. For most of Earth's history, this rock was buried. But during the last ice age, the massive Laurentide ice sheet acted as a continental-scale bulldozer. The advancing glaciers scraped the continent clean, stripping away pre-existing topsoil and leaving nothing but bare rock behind. This left behind millions of square kilometers of hard, smooth granite, covered by a thin layer of dirt and thousands of depressions flooded with meltwater. Without deep topsoil, root systems cannot anchor and crops cannot draw nutrients, making large-scale agriculture across the Shield a physical impossibility. Infrastructure is equally difficult. Building in this region requires physically blowing up ancient granite. When laying the Pacific Railway, workers had to abandon dynamite for highly unstable nitroglycerin just to carve a path through the stone. This ancient foundation ensures the northern landmass can neither feed nor physically support massive urban centers. Even if the rock were buildable, the climate above it is shaped by a geographic titan, the Hudson Bay. Despite its massive surface area, the Hudson Bay is exceptionally shallow. The water loses heat rapidly and freezes over completely during the winter months. This frozen bay acts as a continental refrigerator. It traps polar weather systems and pulls subarctic temperatures much further south than they reach in Europe or Asia. This constant cold creates permafrost, ground that remains frozen for years. It covers nearly half of Canada, creating an unstable foundation that warps roads and sinks buildings, rejecting permanent settlement. The territory of Nunavut spans the same physical area as Mexico, yet it sustains a total population of only about 41,000 people. The combination of frozen water and unstable soil forces human settlement almost exclusively toward the southern border. If 95% of the country is a fortress of sterile rock and permafrost, we have to look at the specific geography that allowed Canada to become an economic powerhouse. Human activity is concentrated along the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes corridor. This corridor bypasses the rock of the Shield. Millions of years ago, an ancient inland sea deposited deep, arable sediment here, creating a fertile zone isolated from the surrounding granite. The lakes also serve as a thermal battery. They absorb intense heat during the summer and radiate it back out through the winter, keeping the surrounding soil warm enough to prevent crops from freezing. These navigable waters and fertile soils forced the country's urban centers to cluster. Cities like Montreal and Toronto grew because they sit in the only pocket of land where agriculture and trade are physically viable. The world's second largest country functions as a thin, European-sized nation clinging to a subcontinental wilderness, demonstrating how civilization remains at the mercy of physical design. To understand the true scale of Canada, look at this map. We can take the entire landmass of the European Union, drop it inside the Canadian borders, and still have over 1 million square kilometers of wilderness left over. But despite claiming nearly 10 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface, the human footprint here is vanishingly small. The second largest country on the planet holds fewer people than the state of California. This population density map reveals the paradox. The vast interior sits completely dark, while 40 million people crowd into a bright band on the southern edge. Zooming in, a strict boundary emerges. 80% of Canadians live within 100 miles of the US border. It is easy to look at that line and blame the brutal winters, but temperature alone fails to explain the void. Halfway across the world, Russia sustains multiple major cities and millions of residents at the exact same northern latitudes. So if the cold isn't the only culprit, we have to look deeper into the Earth to find the invisible geographic wall, keeping an entire nation trapped in the south. That wall is the Canadian Shield. Looking at the North American continent, this highlighted horseshoe-shaped geological formation dominates the map, covering essentially half of Canada with Precambrian rock that formed over 1 billion years ago. During the last ice age, the Laurentide ice sheet acted like a continental bulldozer. As miles of solid ice ground across this territory, it physically scraped the landscape down to its bare foundations, stripping away millennia of accumulated debris and topsoil. When the ice finally retreated, it left behind an exposed, weathered granite surface that still defines the terrain today. Without a thick, nutrient-rich layer of topsoil, growing crops on this bedrock is biologically impossible. You cannot sustain a mass population where you cannot grow mass calories. Even if you import food, sheltering a population here requires brutal logistical warfare. Building basic highways, laying down rail lines, or digging municipal sewer systems means repeatedly blasting through solid granite with heavy explosives. The shield operates as an active, hostile barrier. By denying both the soil needed for agriculture and the yielding ground required for infrastructure, it systematically filters out mass human settlement. Just beyond the exposed rock, the landscape shifts into the boreal forest. This dense, practically unbroken canopy of pine, spruce, and fir covers over 1/3 of the country, presenting a massive physical barricade to horizontal movement. Pushing further north into the Arctic territories reveals a staggering logistical void. The territory of Nunavut spans a landmass roughly the size of Mexico, yet it is home to barely 40,000 residents. Laying down permanent infrastructure here means fighting permafrost. The ground stays frozen year-round, causing any heated building or paved road to warp, crack, and sink into the earth as the ice beneath it thaws and refreezes. That extreme cold also eliminates maritime lifelines. The Hudson Bay, a massive body of water cutting deep into the interior, freezes completely solid during the winter, instantly severing vital shipping routes and locking the region in a deep freeze. Between the agricultural dead zone of the Rocky Shield and the logistical nightmare of the frozen north, geography systematically eliminates 95% of the Canadian map as a viable human habitat. What remains is the Southern Sanctuary, a highly compressed, fertile strip of lowlands wedged precariously between the edge of the Canadian Shield and the United States border. Because the population is forced so far south, the climate here breaks every stereotype of the Great White North. Canada's southernmost point, Middle Island, actually sits on the exact same latitude line as Rome and Chicago. Human geography here followed the water. The St. Lawrence River served as a mandatory funnel, acting as the only navigable highway into the continent's interior, turning early settlements into wealthy, heavily defended natural toll booths. This diagram illustrates the critical advantage of the Great Lakes. These massive bodies of fresh water act as a thermal battery, absorbing the intense heat of the summer sun. As temperatures plummet in the winter, the lakes radiate that stored warmth back onto the surrounding land, actively insulating crops from deep freezes. That specific combination of deep water access, rich soil, and moderated climate allows for extreme hyper-dense urbanization to thrive on the edge of the wilderness. Whether it's the climate-moderated corridor of the Great Lakes or the rare islands of fertile soil in the prairies, 90% of Canadians are clustered into these specific pockets. Outside these narrow zones, the geography stops providing the basic requirements for a modern civilization to survive. Canada functions less like a contiguous country and more like a small, high-density nation tethered directly to a massive, uninhabited subcontinental wilderness. While the Shield and the frozen North exclude cities, they provide the raw materials that keep those cities running. This terrain holds 3% of the entire Earth's renewable freshwater and 20% of its total freshwater supply. The steep, rugged topography of the Canadian Shield is weaponized for energy. This environment allows Quebec to generate 99% of its power from water, exporting enough surplus electricity to act as a green battery for the northeastern United States. Further west, beneath the freezing forests of Alberta, the hostile terrain hides an estimated 165 billion barrels of oil, turning one of the planet's most difficult environments into a global energy engine. The distribution of people across this land follows a blueprint laid down over 1 billion years ago. Political lines on a map eventually yield to the reality of ancient rock and frozen ground.